Hey everyone, Cool Kid here, and welcome back for another episode of Random Hot Take Nonsense. Before we start, I have a few boilerplate things I want to get through real quick. First of all, a lot of people left feedback on the first video that the takes I was talking about were not spicy enough, and that was totally fair. I actually completely agree with that. Originally, I wanted to prevent my own personal bias for what counts as a hot take to be a factor in the video. So when I was making it, I went ahead and just did it from top to bottom on the original post. My goal with that was to get my own bias out of the equation as much as possible, but in hindsight, the fact that things are sorted by top comment made it so that most of what I talked about wasn't really that controversial, so this time I've decided I was going to play favorites and specifically hunt down things that I thought would be controversial, so let me know if you think I did a better job with the hot part of the hot take video this time. Also, there's going to be a bit of a format change. I'm no longer just looking at the original post or comment section or what have you, but instead I actually saved all of these beforehand. So my goal for this series moving forward is we're just going to read 25 of them. How long it takes us to get through those 25, that's just up in the air. Maybe this one will be shorter than the first one, maybe it'll be longer, I really have no idea. The first video was 34 takes, I believe, so this one will probably be shorter, but I thought it would be best to just kind of stick to a specific number. I'm also considering maybe making this a weekly show, maybe every Saturday I just sit down and go through 25 hot takes from the prior video. I swear I'm not becoming a slop tuber, I've been hard at work on a bunch of regular videos, I promise. But I thought this would be a fun opportunity to put stuff out more regularly and have some more interactivity with my audience, so I thought maybe doing it as a weekly thing would be fun, so let me know in the comments if you think that's interesting. Kind of branching off of that, if I do this as a regular show, let me know if you'd be interested in having any guests on as well. Maybe having an episode where I have on Sabuchi or Seijin or Sci-Fi or someone, and instead of just reading community hot takes, we get their hot takes, or maybe we read the hot takes together or something like that. The last thing I want to mention real quick is that navigating the comments of the last video for these hot takes was a huge pain in the ass because I'm an idiot and didn't consider that maybe people were going to leave actual regular comments and takes, so sifting through everything was really annoying. So if you have a hot take you want read in the next episode, I'm going to pin a comment down below, reply specifically to that one, I'm going to look there first for any hot takes that I want to talk about in the future, and then if I run out of hot takes under that, then I'll start digging through the comments. I know not everyone is going to listen to me when I say that, but if you want your stuff actually talked about, the highest odds of it being discussed is there. Okay, so because I saved these ahead of time, unlike last time, I'm not going into these completely blind. I do have a little bit of foreknowledge as to what this stuff contains because I picked it out an hour ago, so I have kind of prepared my thoughts a little bit, but I mostly wanted to go into this with a more discussion-oriented mindset, so I have tried my best to not formulate things too much. Before we start though, you're all going to have to listen to me crack open a cold one. I don't know if my mic will pick this up. Yeah, there we go. Holy shit, I'm looking at the waveform on my other monitor. That peaked the hell out of my mic. Oh, what happened? Okay, well, it's not even a beer. This is just a can of Coke. Dude, for a series like this, maybe I should drink a fucking beer. Okay, let's get into our first take. So, first up, I think the old Corpus tileset needs to make a comeback. It had a very distinct atmosphere and gameplay feel that we don't get a lot of in modern Warframe anymore. It would also increase the tileset variability, and with DE going back to the old grittier lighting for the asteroid-based tileset recently, there's no real good reason for the old ship to be condemned to the tileset graveyard like that. For example, the barren and boring Phobos could be repurposed into the good old nostalgia planet. This is honestly a very interesting take. I think we're starting off fairly strong, because I actually have a lot of nostalgia for the Corpus ship tileset, but if you want my honest opinion, its gameplay mostly sucked. There were a lot of rooms that had a shit ton of doors in them, and your waypoint would just struggle with that like crazy. Don't get me wrong, most Warframe rooms have several doors, but the Corpus ship tileset was just a huge pain in the ass to navigate because all those doors were on a bunch of different levels. There are specific tiles from it that I miss, like the one that came back in Mirror Defense, the old defense tile I have a lot of nostalgia for. I don't think it's necessarily an amazing defense tile. In fact, most of the tile goes totally unused in defense. It was much better in my opinion for interception, which it didn't come back for, but I mean, Mirror Defense makes decent use of it with all the crystal spots that you have to find and things like that. But there were a lot of rooms in the tile set that I just don't think were good, like the cargo hold rooms. They were really cool, but they also had the problem of being really big and pretty empty. Or there was the cargo elevator room. That one made waypoints just freak the hell out whenever you were in there. I don't know, I think that when it came to tileset reworks, the Corpus ship was one of the weirdest, because it didn't really try to bring back a lot of the old tiles, right? Like, the Corpus Gas City has a lot of new tiles in it, but there were a lot of direct comparisons of, like, they were specifically trying to remake a lot of the original tiles. Whereas for the Corpus ship, they really took it in a brand new direction, and some people vibe with that direction and some people don't. I do have a lot of nostalgia for the old Corpus ship tile set, and I wouldn't be opposed to it being re-added to the game, but I don't think it played great from a gameplay perspective. I do think that the modern one definitely plays a lot better for the most part. I know people absolutely despise the interception and defense tile on the new one, and I don't love it either myself, but I think that overall the old tile set definitely had a lot of friction with the way you had to navigate it and stuff like that. Again, I'm not at all opposed to it coming back, especially if it was relegated to like a specific area, especially for nostalgia, right? But I don't necessarily think that it like is superior to the modern one, if that makes sense. Also, this person mentions the older, grittier lighting, but the lighting isn't necessarily older so much as that it was like overhauled to be more realistic. The old Corpus ship tileset lighting was very flat, because old Warframe's lighting was very flat. The engine was not particularly complicated when it came to that stuff. So, I'm pretty sure we have an asteroid base take coming up, actually, but I do want to mention that I do like the approach that the asteroid base took of feeling a lot more moody, because a lot of the older tile sets, like the original Corpus ship, and even now with like the Grineer Galleon and stuff, their lighting feels kind of homogeneous, I guess. I like the approach for places like the labs and the Zarr, you know, places that use like GI lighting or just more advanced lighting tricks in general, where they're a lot darker and more atmospheric. Even if the volumetric fog in the labs just runs like shit and I had to turn it off because it hurt my performance so much. I don't know if anyone remembers this, there was a bug on launch where it would literally tank your FPS to like 30 if you had it on. I guess to kind of wrap up my thoughts on this, because I'm kind of going all over the place, I have a lot of nostalgia for the original Corpus ship tile set, but I do think from a gameplay perspective it did kind of suck. I'm not opposed to it coming back, but I think it should, if it is to come back, it should stay in a very specific place, because I feel like, compared to the modern tile set, I do personally think it's worse overall. Okay, next up. My hot take is that post-1999 is a better dark sci-fi story than early Warframe. The body horror of Warframes is more visceral when they are conscious and can talk to you about their experiences of getting more and more infested. They should add more Kim-style conversations with the rest of the Warframe cast. I want to talk with Call about clone rot and Alad V about the Corpus board. So in regards to the first part about Protoframes being a better dark sci-fi story than the original Warframe, the question for me is like, when you say early Warframe, how far back are we going? Because when I think of early Warframe, being someone who's been playing since the game first came to Xbox in like September of 2014, I'm thinking like pre-Second Dream era, right? But I'm assuming this person is talking about, like, at least up to the sacrifice, because they mentioned the body horror is more visceral when they're conscious, so I assume that there's sort of, like, that breakpoint of, like, okay, we already knew that the body horror was, like, an element. I feel like the Protoframe approach doesn't supplement the old story. I feel like it's a new exploration of the concept, if that makes sense. I don't think it's necessarily strictly better, I think it was just taken in a new direction, because personally, I think the original sentence of becoming a Warframe is still really creepy by itself. Not even just being turned into one, but what you're left as after the fact, right? Like, especially in the sacrifice when you see how Umbra is trapped in his memory of killing his own son over and over. Shit, spoilers in this video, by the way, I guess. But the fact that he was stuck in that basically forever is really haunting, and I feel like that approach of, like, what other moments are other Warframes stuck in, or what drives them, I think is a really interesting question that the story has explored in really interesting ways. I don't think they necessarily need to talk about it, but like I said, it's kind of a different story angle, right? Because like the Hex, they're still conscious, they're still people, and it focuses more on their transformation process and how uncomfortable it is, you know, both to go through that process and to be a Warframe. Whereas the horror element, or sort of like the psychological element, right, of Umbra or Kullervo or what have you, is the losing yourself and like holding on to like primal instincts. It's so, like, you look at like Kullervo's lore in terms of like what drove him, or Umbra's lore or what have you, for like these frames that get stuck essentially going insane, and how they handle that, or what primitive parts of their original baseline personality they hold on to. I think it's super interesting. And kind of beyond that, when that expectation is subverted, like with Jade, it's also a really cool way to explore the story. Because I think that there's a lot of horror in the idea that not only are you turned into a Warframe, but you essentially go nuts. But when you look at, like, for example, Umbra, right? He was driven by a very strong emotion from before he turned into a Warframe, or a strong connection with an event. And that was by design, but it's a topic that's kind of come back up in the story over time. Like Kullervo with the search for his creator, or my favorite example is Jade, which is when I mentioned, like, the subverting the expectation thing earlier. Because, okay, this is like a genuine spoiler warning now. If you haven't read Jade's Promise, the lore fragment behind Teshin, I highly recommend that you do, because I'm going to spoil the fuck out of it. So, Jade's Promise, the lore fragment behind Teshin, there's like a feather behind him, what that reveals is that Jade was completely lucid, unlike basically any other person that was turned into a Warframe. Her connection to her unborn child caused her to remain completely sane, unlike everyone else. Like, the Stalker didn't go as insane as everyone else, but he's still not all there. But Jade was like a completely normal person on a mental level, and I think that the horror of that is also really interesting. Because, like, the Hex explore it in a different way, right? They're fused and mutated, and there's still that element of their human bodies left. But Jade, her humanity is entirely in her psyche at that point, right? Like, her body is completely gone, and not even just that, the Aura can use her as a weapon to kill people that they, disagree with, or kill people that are dissenting or what have you. The Jade Light gets used in the story on a bunch of different people. It kills Margulis, it kills a dude in the Samaris lore fragment that talks about the sentience. I think that Yanta uses it on herself, if I remember correctly. So Jade, this character that we know has such a strong connection with the, life because of her kid, is being used to slaughter people, and she can't do anything about it. And that angle of her still being lucid but being trapped in her own body like that, and how she pushes through for the sake of her child, and then obviously the tragic ending that we know she dies and she never gets to see the result of all of the hard work that she put in to keep going after all of that time. It's just like a really interesting angle to explore that from. Like I said, I don't hate the way the Hex approached it, but I don't think they're better. I think they're just a different way to explore a very wide net concept, if that makes sense. And I love the way that Warframe has interpreted it. Like Jade's Quest, I was generally pretty disappointed with, but after reading the lore fragment, so much of it is recontextualized in a way that makes the story so much better and so much more interesting. And I haven't even talked about, like, there's a part where Jade connects to an operator and, like, consoles them because they're just a kid fighting a war, and Jade sees that. Most people, when they would connect to a Warframe, like, presumably, based on Margulis's descriptions at least, they would wake up into a, a lucid second dream. So I don't think they were really properly aware they were connecting to a Warframe, but because Jade still had her mental faculties, they were aware that they were connecting to a Warframe, and there's like a dialogue that goes on between them. I think at this point I'm just glazing the fucking lore fragment, but the point is that I think that the horror of being turned into a Warframe has a lot of cool angles to explore it from Umbra to Jade to Kullervo to the Stalker, and now to the Protoframes. And I don't think that the Protoframes are strictly better, so much as that I think that their approach is just different, and I like the different approach, and the way that you can, see it both visually, and the way you can read it, and their Kim conversations is all very interesting, but I don't think I would consider it better. The second part of this is kind of a minor thing, and that's about wanting more Kim-style conversations with more of the Warframe cast. Personally, I'd be down for this, but a lot of people absolutely fucking hate this system, which surprises me, because it was really well received from what I remember, but as time has gone on and we've had more extensions to it with Tekrod Encore and the old piece, I'm seeing a lot of people express a lot of distaste for the Kim system. Now, I think there's more reasons for that than just they don't want to read the lore, because especially with Tekrod Encore and the old piece, there's like an intended experience. There's not an intended experience so much as that you can mess them up, and then you have to reset, and that's really annoying. So I don't know how many of the issues stem from I don't want to read versus I don't want to do this again, but if it's like me personally, I would totally be down to have more conversations with other Warframe characters. I personally love the Kim system, and I would love to see it expanded, especially to explore existing characters more. Alright, next up. Hotter take. We should give sentient units the pre-rework damage attenuation formula to both make them an actual threat and incentivize shredding their resistances with the operator. This kinda makes me wonder if this person knows what the old formula was like, because I think I'm going to espouse the hottest take of this video maybe. Damage attenuation should not have been removed. I think that their initial attempt at reworking it was so catastrophic that they just threw a bucket of water on it, put the fire out, and that was the end of it. They just pulled the plug. But I don't honestly think that was the right approach, because so many enemies that used to be threatening are a total joke now, and I think it really proved why attenuation was conceptually good. In execution, it was terrible, and it had a lot of problems that the sort of the basis for my objection to this comment specifying the old formula, but conceptually it made sense, right? If you're going to blitz through a boss immediately or blitz through an enemy immediately, how much threat can they really pose? The issue with the old damage attenuation formula, at least if you ask me, was it was way too aggressive, and for some reason, most enemies had multiple forms of it at the same time. Like, the Jugulus was actually one of the first enemies that was kind of like a testing ground for damage attenuation, before it was way more prominent after, like, the Archons and stuff got added. But if you look at their wiki page at the time, they had multiple different formulas for the same mechanic on them at the same time. And on top of that, it was just not really clear to the player what exactly was even happening, and it really homogenized your loadout. If you weren't using something that would kill the enemy immediately, then you were going to have a really rough time with certain weapon types. It really forced you to play a specific way around the mechanic, and with how widespread it was, I don't think that was a great thing. Now, do I think that some kind of attenuation could work for the Sentients? Actually, yes. I wouldn't be opposed to a mechanic like that being added if it was more clear how it worked and structured in such a way that it made more sense, right? Because the original attenuation was just all over the place. Different enemies had different formulas, several of them had several applied at the same time, it was just a mess. Pre-rework attenuation, not necessarily, but some kind of attenuation. I think that honestly the game in general would fare better if that was the case. It's just that the initial rework was so bad, like you couldn't one-shot a level 1 Demolisher because attenuation was that aggressive. So I think that it would probably have been the best approach to, well, leave that one in the oven for longer, first of all, but have a system that was more well implemented. And I think that just because of the necessity of the game basically breaking when they first released the rework, they just pulled the plug and never looked at it again. But I think that now that you can, like, nuke a Dedicant or a Babau or even, like, a Necromech so quickly, I kind of miss the mechanic. Not the parts where it was complete ass and you dump 13 magazines into a Dedicant and they would still be alive. I don't miss that at all. But I understand why the mechanic was added, and I think we're really seeing the consequences of, like, oh, maybe this was why the mechanic was introduced. Okay, next up, my hot take. I don't play Warframe to challenge my combat skills. I play it to set up builds so I can annihilate everything and laugh about it. I don't want more challenging content, and if more challenging content is added, it should not have exclusive non-cosmetic rewards like Temporal Archimedea and its arcanes. Like you said in your video, if I wanted to be challenged when playing Warframe, I'd use worse builds. Okay, so this take is like multi-layered. There's a lot that I could say in response to this, but my thought process goes like this. I'll try and walk you guys through it to make this easy. So in Warframe, you have this potential to reach a ton of power, right? There's this huge curve, or I guess this huge mountain, right, that you can climb, and once you're at the top, you become very powerful. The question, I think, becomes, if you don't have anything to use that power on, what's the point in pursuing additional power? Because there comes a point where you don't need it anymore, and that's not the peak of the mountain, right? We can get way more powerful than the game actually requires. So if there's content that doesn't demand some level of difficulty, right? If you don't need a certain level of power to pass an amount of content, then what's the point in pursuing the power in the first place? And I think that's kind of the struggle when it comes to difficulty in Warframe, is that the game is a power fantasy, and people are going to, have a lot of fun just shredding things. That's a huge part of the game. But at the same time, if there is nothing difficult to actually put your knowledge and skills to the test, either mechanically, through your build crafting, anything like that, then pursuing the power doesn't really become enticing anymore. Like, what's the point, if that makes sense? And then, kind of furthermore, with the if there is challenging content, it should not have exclusive rewards, then comes the problem of, like, if there aren't exclusive, non-cosmetic rewards, then what's the point of doing the challenging content? Like, you look at, like, Archimedeas, right? Temporal and Deep. I think that both of those are kind of in a sweet spot because you can do them for guaranteed shots at their arcanes, or if you don't want to do them, you can just roll arcane packs from arcanes you got with easier resources, right? Or through easier content, rather. Like, maybe you're farming Steel Path Acolytes, or Ascension, or Void Cascade. I guess Void Cascade wouldn't necessarily be easier, but that kind of thing, I think that that's perfectly fine. The rewards are much easier to obtain in the Archimedeas, but if you don't want to play them, you do have an external way to get those things. It's just going to take you probably longer. And then kind of if you do both, right, if you do the Archimedeas and the packs, you can kind of fast track yourself. The point I'm trying to make is basically this. If there is nothing to challenge you in Warframe, I think that the game will rapidly not only get boring, but then there's no reason to keep pursuing, new sources of power. And with each update, obviously power creep is a thing in this game, and they add new powerful options. And I think that if you're going to get stuck at a point where you can already kill everything 10 times over, and the game isn't pushing back on that at all, then what's the point of even pursuing anything else? And beyond that, well, I think we probably shouldn't have complete exclusivity when it comes to non-cosmetic rewards. I think that difficult content should be the primary way to obtain certain things, because if you want the best gear, I think you should have to do the most difficult content, at least on some level. Like I said, you can have like the arcane packs and stuff as a way to get it if you don't want to. But in basically every other game I can think of, it's that kind of mentality of, if you want the best stuff, you have to do the hardest stuff. And in a game like Warframe, I'm not opposed to there being hard stuff, even if the game's baseline is fairly easy. I think that the two can coexist fairly comfortably, but I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been playing this game for so long, but blowing up entire rooms with like a Valkyr slide attack or Colorvo, with his 3, or Equinox, that just isn't fun to me anymore. And while I can deliberately nerf myself to have more fun and content that is too easy, I think that a big part of the difficulty of Warframe, or a big part of the fun of investing into your build in Warframe, is trying to see what is the hardest thing you can do with it. And pushing that envelope is something that I personally think is good for the game. And we can have, ways to obtain that content more easily, like the arcane packs and stuff for people who don't want to do it. But I personally am all for more endgame level content, because I do personally want the challenge. I think that being put in a situation where you really have to find out if your build is good or not, I think that's a lot of fun. Okay, next up. I don't know if it's even a hot take, but I really think all of Warframe's writing is mediocre at best. Emotional moments rarely land, people seem confused about what's happening a lot, and a lot of times the story feels like a slog. Okay, quite a bit to unpack in this one. When it comes to the writing is mediocre, the question for me is, what writing? Because there's a lot of different writing in this game that varies a lot. Do you mean in quests? Do you mean in the Kim system? Do you mean the in-mission justifications for things? I am going to move forward with the assumption, because of the following parts about like emotional moments rarely land and stuff like that, I'm going to move forward with the assumption this person means quest writing. At the very least, that's like the baseline that I want to work with here. And I don't think the quests are poorly written. I think Warframe's biggest problem in its quests, personally, is that they are poorly paced. They try to fit way too much stuff into way too small of a time span, and the result is that you don't actually have that much time to get emotionally grounded in the story that's happening in that quest. Like, you look at the old piece, right? Adis and his death near the end of the quest doesn't really hit emotionally for a lot of people, myself included, because we only knew him for like an hour at best up to that point, and so him dying in the quest doesn't really feel that impactful. And Warframe has a weird tendency to do that a lot these days. Like, you look at Ballas's death in the Sacrifice, right? We already knew who he was. There was a history there that was built upon over time with, like, the Prime trailers and the intervention from him and, like, Apostasy Prologue and all of that stuff. We knew who Ballas was. So when he dies, or it seems like he dies, there was a significant amount of weight to that moment. It's not like I was sad, but that wasn't really the point. The point I'm trying to make is that it had like a lot more weight because there was so much more time to develop that relationship. Whereas you look at like the Hex quest, when all of the Hex die at the end, I didn't care. Maybe that makes me a horrible person, but most of them were mean to me the entire time. The only guy who seemed chill was Amir, and for the most part, we didn't really have enough time to actually form a connection with them. Maybe this is going to be considered an insane take. Personally, I think the Hex quest would have worked way better if the ending did not happen in the quest. Instead, I think that you should have had to progress through the Kim system a bit first to get to know the characters, and then you'd hit the ending, and then you're hit with the bombshell that they all die, and the plot twist that you can loop time in Holvania and whatnot. I think that if it was structured like that, where you have time to connect to the characters a lot more, and then you find out it wasn't enough and you have to go back and form a stronger bond, I think that would have worked way better, because I just didn't care about the Hex at first. It's kind of the same with Adis. When you're doing all of the post-quest missions on Perita, you form a much stronger relationship with Adis because you're interacting with him so much more, or at least you're hearing him a lot more. So that's kind of the crux of my argument, is that they're trying to fit too much into too short of a time span. One, with the emotional moments, right? But also the people seem confused about what's happening a lot. I think that that's also a big part of it in terms of the time constraints, because they don't have enough time to fully explain what is actually happening. You look at Duviri. I had to watch 2 of my friends play that quest for a total of 3 completions before I understood what was actually going on, because the quest was too short to explain itself. And frankly, it was super gimped by Duviri being an alternate start, but we'll talk about that later. So they just tried to fit too many concepts into that short space, and the pacing felt off. Same with, like, the stuff with the old piece, in terms of, like, the moments that are interspersed with Adis and, like, the history the operator has with them already. They try to give you glimpses of, you know, what they would do together at, like, the fort and stuff like that, but it doesn't feel like they elaborated on it enough. And then for the last part, the story feels like a slog. I think that one's a lot more of just like a feel-based thing, and I don't personally find it a slog to get through. I enjoy the story, even if it sometimes feels kind of muddled. I went on a rant on stream about this once, about how a lot of modern Warframe lore feels like, I think I called it game theory bait almost, where it feels like you are left to speculate way too many of the details. But I think that a lot of that is the consequence of the lack of time, right? There's so much crucial story information that either gets left out or is just not explained well enough, and I think that ultimately DE should either A, lengthen their quests, or B, and more realistically, narrow their scope. Weirdly enough, the New War, the game's longest quest by a country mile, right? It took me 6 hours to beat on my first completion. That quest doesn't even have enough time to explain what the hell is going on. There are still questions from that quest that have not been answered, and it bothers me, but I need to not go on a full-blown rant about the New War. That could literally be an entire episode in and of itself, but there's so much stuff that they just don't have time to explain, and I think that they just need to narrow the scope of their quests or expand the amount of time that they have. Sort of to wrap my thoughts up on this, I don't think Warframe's writing is bad. In fact, a lot of it, like the Kim conversations and whatnot, I love. I think that the game is actually quite well written. The problem is that it's very poorly paced, especially in the actual quests. Like, okay, one last thing before I move on to the next one, the Cavia. The Cavia are my favorite Syndicate story in the entire game, because you have time to care about what's happening to them. Because it's not like Adis or the Hex or whoever else, where they just fucking die in the quest, and like, I don't care, I just met them. The Cavia, you meet them in the quest, you get to learn their personalities, and then you get to see them evolve over the course of the story. As you progress, their dialogue changes. You hear their opinions about each other change. The hostilities and the tensions between Fibonacci and Tagford grow, and then they find out that they're getting sick and they're dying, and they start to cough when you speak to them, and the dialogue changes to have this greater sense of, like, impending finality to it. The way that that is handled is so much better than most of the game's story, because you have time to witness each story beat's consequences and grow attached to the characters and empathize with the conflict, right? Each side of the conflict that's going on. So when the death actually happens, I mean, let's be real here, we knew it was a fake out because nobody actually dies in this fucking game. But there was so much more emotional weight to everything that was happening because you had time to actually get invested, and the game actually took time to properly explore what was going on. So, if they did more stuff that, like, the story was not in the quest, but the quest was the primer to the story, and then it was more of a slow burn thing after the fact, I think the game would work a lot better from a narrative perspective, and the Cavia, I think, are, like, the prime example of that. Okay, next up, where are the actually hot takes? I'm taking my hot take here, then. Duviri should be back as an alternative start, and I'd go as far as to say that it should be as close to Force Start. Chroma, respectfully, I knew that if you were going to comment on this video, it was going to be some bullshit. Okay, first you try to gaslight me into putting Chroma's passive higher than it was on the passive tier list, and now it's this bullshit. Okay, I'm just playing around, but I really wish, like, something I want to make clear for anyone who leaves a future hot take, if you're going to leave a hot take, I do request that you explain it, because it's a lot harder to discuss if I don't know why you think what you think. But I am just absolutely against this. I think that Duviri being an alternate start was a colossal mistake, and we still feel the effects of that to this day, and I kind of want to explain why. So, DE set up Duviri as an alternate start. It was a really big push for marketing purposes, if you want my honest opinion. It was not really with the longevity of the system in mind, it was to get new people in, and it worked at that. But Duviri had a fundamental problem as an alternate start, one that DE themselves realized, and this is their stated reason for pulling it as an alternate start. DE realized that Duviri, while it still plays like Warframe, is still very different from the other 95% of the game. If you start with Duviri, enjoy your time there, and then hate the rest of the game, you've just wasted that player's time, and they're not gonna stick around. So what's the point of bringing in new players if they don't enjoy the wider game? And even beyond that, I think there are some serious flaws in the quest because of the fact that it was an alternate start that really messed shit up. First of all, transference being introduced before the second dream, awful decision. Narratively, horrible decision. The reveal of transference and how it works is so well done in the second dream that the fact that they just kind of tacitly include it in Duviri makes me so mad. It's so poorly executed compared to the genuinely, like, you know, you get chills watching it scene in the second dream where the operator falls out of the pod and the camera feed cuts and then the perspective switches and you crawl back to your Warframe and put your hand on it and it picks you up. That scene is one of the best in the entire game, if you want my honest opinion. And then Duviri is just like, oh yeah, you could just transfer into the guy. Like, what the fuck? What do you mean? Also, and I think the bigger problem, is Duviri was severely hamstrung in terms of exploring its own narrative because it spent so much time just trying to make the player learn the game. Like, certain tutorial elements of the quest have been removed, but you spend so much time in the Undercroft for no fucking reason other than to just try and teach new players how to play it. And also, so much of the narrative feels like it got left behind to make space for that stuff. Go rewatch the original TennoCon reveal for the Duviri Paradox quest, and the scene where you go find the mask and you, like, recite the stuff with Bombastine. It looks so much more interesting, and it seems like they were going to explore the angle of the Drifter and Thrax being the same person so much more thoroughly. And we just didn't get that, and I think that that is lame as hell. Duviri's world and its narrative has become one of my favorite parts of Warframe, and the way it was explored I think was super interesting, with the idea of, like, the Void interacting with the Drifter's emotions, and how secretly the Duviri storybook was actually a guide on how to prevent that kind of thing from happening, and the Lost Islands and how they all correspond in some way with events that actually happened in the story, and all of these lingering questions like, who is the Wandering Vagabond? What's up with the graves at Titan's Rest? There's so much cool stuff in Duviri to theorize about and to look at, but the quest just dropped the ball so fucking hard. When I first beat it, I didn't even realize that Thrax and the Drifter were the same person, because the conversation at the end with Teshin was, like, cryptic enough that I didn't really get what was happening. Like I said, I had to watch 2 other people beat that quest to fully feel like I understand it. And I don't think I'm the only one, because I had a lot of times on my streams when Duviri was new, where I would explain the story to people because they didn't get it either. To wrap up my thoughts, not only do I think is it a struggle from, like, a mechanics and I guess, like, logical standpoint to have people start in Duviri because they might not like the wider game, but I think that the consequences of that initial decision just ruined the quest and marred the story of Duviri basically permanently. Because that's the thing, the alternate start did not stay in the game, but the quest is in the game forever, and it will always bear the scars of that experiment. Maybe Chroma will elaborate on this more in the comments of this video or something as to why they think this, but I just reject it wholesale. The addition of Duviri as an alternate start was a mistake. I really wish they didn't do it because it fucked up the quest permanently, and I do not think they should do anything like it again. Okay, next up. My Warframe hot take is that the Kuva Zarr's barrage mode is something really unique in feeling, and I'd gladly lose the AoE if I could actually use the barrage without running into ridiculous ammo issues. Kinda similar, the Tenet Plinx should not have gotten an AoE at all. I've gone on this rant before, but the TLDR of it is, it was always kind of a niche meme weapon, but could actually pack a punch if you built it right. An AoE turns its identity upside down, and not in a good way. Okay, so for the first take with the barrage mode, I actually totally agree on it feeling unique and cool, but I don't think that it would be good to, like, soul for a soul exchange the AoE mode for a better barrage mode. Full disclosure, Idan is a good friend of mine, and we actually talked about this take in DMs a bit. My suggestion was that the Zarr should hold 15 shots instead of 5, but each cannon shot consumes 3, where each barrage shot consumes 1. That way, the cannon feeling would be basically unchanged, but the barrage form would have an opportunity to actually shine, because I do agree, like the ammo nerfs in Veilbreaker just crossfire nuked the barrage form off the map. As for the Tenet Plinx one, I myself am a Plinx enjoyer. I really liked that weapon. It was actually one of my most used secondaries before the Tenet one came out. But I'm not super bothered by the addition of the AoE, because I just don't use it if I don't want to. But I understand where Idan is coming from, in terms of, like, it had an identity as almost like the original Lotto, as kind of like a meme weapon, or even like the Lex. The Lex wasn't a meme weapon so much as that it was like an aura weapon, right? It wasn't something that you would really use that much because it had strong single target potential, which wasn't super good in Warframe for quite a while, and I mean, these days honestly still kinda isn't, but the Lex was a weapon that you would use because it looked fucking cool, right? Not because you actually wanted to kill shit. And the Plinx was the same way. If you vibed with it, it was a really fun gun, but it wasn't necessarily super strong. Then they dropped the AoE form on the Tenet Plinx, and people flocked to it because it's a pocket AoE weapon that has infinite ammo, which is kinda lame. Funnily enough though, when Synth Charge got nerfed to not work on the Tenet Plinx, a lot of people abandoned this weapon, and honestly, good riddance. I'm gonna keep left-clicking with this thing, and I'm gonna keep fishing for headshots. That's always how I found it fun. These are both kinda like low-stakes takes, I guess. Like, they aren't necessarily earth-shattering in terms of if they were implemented, it would cause a huge problem, but I still think it's fun to talk about. Okay, next up, this one is grammatically a little poorly structured, so I'm gonna do my best to read it off in a way that would make sense. You should be able to Helminth passives and the first, second, and third ability, since the fourth ability defines the frame. I do not agree with this at all, personally, and my reasoning for that is very multifaceted. For one, many frames have their identity defined not by their fourth ability. Like Colorvo, his 3 and his 1 are big parts of his identity. His 4 is certainly a component of it, but it is not his entire identity. Same with Volt. His 4 is a big part of his identity, but so are Electric Shield and Speed, they're also big parts of his identity. I also think that it would be very broken to put certain abilities on other frames. Wisp's reservoirs, that's a huge part of her identity. I would say that's the main part of her identity as a frame, is her reservoirs. Those are her first ability. If you could give those to anyone, that would be really bad for Wisp and really game-breaking from a balance perspective. And that's kind of my second major point. This would be a total balancing catastrophe. There are so many good abilities in the first, second, and third slot, and the passives part as well, like, depending on what extreme you push that to. Like, could I put Garuda's passive on anyone? That would be overpowered as shit. Could I put Hildren's passive on anyone? That would also be broken as shit. So, I think that this is one of those things where, would it increase the customization available to us? Yes, absolutely. But I don't personally think that it would be good for the game, because, from a balancing standpoint at least, it would be catastrophic. So, I'm gonna have to disagree with this one. Okay, next up. Hot take, old Corpus aesthetic was way better. Dark and creepy versus bright and, I don't know, generic? Okay, so whether or not you think the old Corpus aesthetic is better is totally subjective. But dark and creepy, it was never dark and creepy. I don't know what people are talking about with that. Also, I feel like to argue that the modern Corpus tileset is more generic is kind of nuts. So, look at the Corpus Outpost, the tileset that is on Venus. If you go there and look at the old Corpus architecture compared to the new Corpus architecture, it is so much more bland and, how do I put this? Like, it's made up of much more simple shapes, and it's much less detailed. And then you go to, like, the modern, like, Deadlock Protocol era ships, or the Gas City, and the designs are a lot more intricate, and in my opinion they feel way more sci-fi, versus, like, the Corpus Outposts, where it's a lot more simplistic. And some people might prefer the simple aesthetic as opposed to the more complicated aesthetic of the modern Corpus, because it did tie into their identity, right? Of like, they're this brutally efficient, profit-oriented group, and so all of their stuff looked generic as shit because that was the mindset that they were working off of, right? It was brutal efficiency, cut corners, no flair, no aesthetics, just do what you need to do, and that's the baseline, because anything more than that is cutting into the bottom line. Like, that was their original identity, visually. But personally, I think that to call the modern Corpus more generic is something that I have a hard time agreeing with, because the old Corpus were so much more simplistic. And then, like I said, dark and creepy. I don't know where this take comes from. I don't remember the old Corpus ships being dark at all. This kind of relates back to like the old style lighting from earlier in the video. I don't remember this tile set being that dark. And so I think that like I'm down for more darker tile sets. I actually like them, but I don't know. This is one I personally disagree with, and I think it's a very vibes-based thing if you would agree with it or not, but I don't really agree with the rationale. Okay, next up. They should just make it so research points from Archimedea accumulate, so that you can either do one run with all modifiers and get all rewards, or do more runs with less modifiers. So if you get a bad selection of frames and weapons in 1 week, you have the option to not pick some of the modifiers, and instead have to put in more time to get the full reward. Or simply do what I do and forget that Archimedea exists until someone mentions it. This is actually an idea that I think has its pros and cons, because personally when Archimedea first came out, this was an idea I really liked. The trade-off of doing it faster with more restrictions or doing it slower with less restrictions was pretty appealing to me at first. I think the hang-up that you run into, though, is that allows you to turbo nuke the difficulty off the face of the planet in exchange for things being a complete slog. And I don't really feel like that's a great way to handle the problem that Archimedea presents. I still personally am much more in support of more robust structural things that make it more fun on like a fundamental level. I don't think this is a terrible idea. In fact, I think it would probably be better for the game if it was implemented. But, I mean, on the one hand, you could argue it like disrespects people who can do it in its full difficulty or whatever. But I also feel like it doesn't really, it's a band-aid over a bullet hole type of thing. I have a whole video on this in Randomness is Difficulty. If you want my complicated thoughts, you can just watch that, to be honest. Okay, next up. My hot take is that most buffs should be uncapped. Let me get 4000% critical chance and critical damage with Inaros and Necrophagic Vigor. Let me get 100 times combo. Let me build up 100,000 stacks of Molt Augmented. Let me get 30 stacks of health conversion. Okay, no, I completely disagree with this, and it's for one fundamental reason. I think Sabuchi actually put it best. I think it was in his Valkyr video. If there is no balance, there is no game. If you can get to such absurd levels of overpoweredness like this person is suggesting, to the point where zero input is required from the player, then what is even the point of playing the game anymore? Now, I will make one concession. Having this be possible in a controlled environment, like a simulacrum or something, where you just want to see how fucked up things can get, that can be super fun. It reminds me of the power donation bug, if anyone here remembers that. For those who don't, the power donation bug was a bug involving Arcwings and the power donation aura, where if you got on an Arcwing and then got off of it in an open world, the power strength reduction would keep stacking. And then if you had a Nidus on your team and they linked to you, negative times a negative is a positive, and you get insanely high power strength amounts. And that was super fun to experiment with, especially because it came back multiple times. There was an exploit in Railjack that let you do it. There was a version with Sevagoth's Shadow that let you do it. This bug just kept coming back. But it couldn't stay in the game, because, like, if you get to the point where you have 1,000,000 power strength or something, there is no game, right? There is no game. Like, have you ever played a Risk of Rain run, and you've looped, like, 3 or 4 times, and literally you don't even know what's happening anymore? Like, Warframe kinda has that problem, but I feel like if you were able to push buffs this far, the game would be so much of a joke that there would just be no fun in it anymore. So, like I said, in a controlled environment, I think it could be fun, but in normal gameplay, I don't agree at all. If there's no balance, there's no game. Like I said, I think Sab put it well. Okay, next up, power creep is, and will always be, my frustration point of this game. Players complain the game is too easy, but then complain when even a slight amount of challenge is added that they can't just stroll through. I hate getting to a boss just to see its health blink from existence. That's exactly what happened in my first Parita run. Well, just use weaker guns. If I have to nerf myself, what was the point of even getting the weapons in the first place? Give me hard mode bosses, but as a general mode, I want the difficulty that those bosses offer to really put what I've made to the test. So, I picked this one out for this video because it's kind of the other side of the thing we talked about earlier with the whole I don't want the game to be hard. This person wants the game to be harder across the board. And while I generally agree with more difficulty and more challenge, I think that this person is kind of skipping over a few things, I guess. The first point about the people complain when there's a slight amount of challenge, I don't know if that's intentionally hyperbolic or if there's a particular incident they're referring to, but I don't think that that's really something I see super often. There are certain times where people like crash out about like an Apex boss or something being too hard, or the Angel's Quest. That was really fucking dumb, if you ask me. But I wish that they would have given a specific example, personally. Beyond that, though, with the, like, what was the point of getting a weapon in the first place if I have to nerf myself? I think that the point of getting a strong weapon is to nuke things faster, right? The reason that you would acquire stronger gear is to kill things faster. If you're killing things too fast, well, that's kind of the point on some level. I don't think it should be like instantaneous, right? I think that there has to be like a sweet spot there, there's a balance, but if you're in an environment where things are dying too fast, I do think nerfing yourself isn't a completely illogical approach, because the reason you obtain more and more power is to do things faster and more efficiently. Or if you're finding yourself in a situation where things are dying too quickly, then that's because the system's working as intended. You've gotten to the point of optimization that you're that strong. I think that, especially with like this mention of Parita, it's especially a struggle in public lobbies, right? If other people are nuking stuff, then you have no say in the matter. Which, dude, I could make a whole video on why I think public lobbies suck and you shouldn't play them, but that's for another day. The last part I want to mention is the give me hard mode bosses, but as a general mode. I think that hard mode bosses staying sectioned off from regular content is actually a good thing at the end of the day. I still think there should be some difficulty in the game. The game should push back on your builds, it should put you to the test. But if you're going to talk difficulty on the level of the Fragmented One, the Apex Tank, you know, Giannis Vor, dude, Giannis Vor is really fucking hard in my opinion. He's the hardest boss in the game, no question. That should not be baseline difficulty, because this game still has a large enough casual audience that people should be able to get through content, right? And I think that that's the sweet spot to me, is the game should resist. You shouldn't be able to cakewalk without like any kind of optimization. I think if you make a specific build for a specific piece of content, then like it makes sense. You're being rewarded for optimizing it, but the game should push back, right? There should be resistance. You should have to change your builds or solve a puzzle in some way, be it through the mechanics, through your build, anything like that. But at the same time, if the game was something where it pushed back so hard that it filtered people, like a Dark Souls or something, or I haven't played Dark Souls, like Sekiro, there's a game I've actually played. If it pushed back hard enough that like the Fragmented One was the standard of difficulty, I think that's going too far in the other direction. So, to wrap up my thoughts on this, I do think the game should be more challenging. Generally speaking, I agree with that, but I think this person is swinging too far in the other direction, and I think that they're kind of missing part of it, at least to me. I'm not trying to say that to like be rude to them, that's just kind of my interpretation of things. Okay, next up, Vampiric Liminus is the single worst modifier in Archimedea. The amount of damage they can do instantly is unusually high and is straight anti-fun. Lost an ETA not too long ago because the Liminus spawned on top of us and killed the entire squad before we had control of ourselves. Okay, this one's interesting because I don't really know. So the mention at the end there of losing an ETA to the Liminus spawning on them, that sounds like a bug. That doesn't sound like how the mechanic is supposed to work. But also, generally, I actually really like this modifier, and I feel like the friction it can produce is specific to two game modes, Stage Defense and Mirror Defense. If you don't have room to run, these guys should not be able to spawn, just period. They are so unbelievably annoying in Mirror Defense and Stage Defense. But when you can run from them, I actually enjoy them. The damage they deal isn't that high. I think it's like a flat, 100 or 150 or something? I'd have to look at the wiki page. But they deal a fixed amount of damage. You typically have 4 or 5 seconds, depending on the frame, to react to the fact that you're dying. They are annoying, but I feel like they're very avoidable in most content. At least in my experience, if you're doing like an exterminator or survival or something, you can move away from them. And I think that the element of trying to play around the Liminus, I personally find it fun when it's not mirror stage defense and I'm stuck in the same spot because I think that's fucking stupid. Again, I don't know if this is like they're venting their frustration with this ETA loss, because I feel that, dude. I've had a lot of times where I die to something like that and I'm like, oh wow, that's complete bullshit. But I personally don't hate this modifier. I know a lot of people really do dislike it, but I think that in environments where it's fun, I enjoy the energy of running from the Liminus, personally. Shit, which one are we on right now? We're only on 14? Oh fuck, I picked too many, dude. Okay. Next up, If new Protoframes mean new Kim chats, then I hope we don't get any more Protoframes. I want to read/listen to a story, not puzzle out what on earth a text option means, agonizing over how it's not something I would ever say. This is interesting because the Kim system is so different from the rest of the game's story because it gives you agency, right? It lets you not only explore, like, what do you want to learn about characters, but it also lets you decide things about your own character. Like, one of the things in Quincy's conversations is you can actually decide what happened to your parents on the Zariman. So, I personally really like that element of the Kim system. The ability to dictate and personalize your own story, I think, is a good thing. The problem, at least to me, is that you can lose certain Kim stories have a fail state. And the originals kinda did if you were like an asshole at every turn, but they felt way more exploratory, right? As opposed to like, oh fuck, is this the right answer? And with the mention of the I don't want to puzzle out what a text option means, I'm guessing this person's hang-up comes from that, is that there is like that mechanical element to it of getting the good ending, and that's kind of a pain in the ass. No, I'm making an assumption there, I'm going to admit that up front, I'm making an assumption with that, but considering what was said, I feel like that probably makes sense. Personally, I love the Kim system, but I do agree that the stress of not knowing if the option you picked is the right one kinda sucks, and I think the original Hex are my favorite Kim lineup for that reason, right? Now, there's the chemistry system. I guess you can argue, like, what if I say the wrong thing as in it doesn't generate chemistry or what have you, but that's not nearly as dire as, like, getting the bad ending for a Tekrot Encore character or the Entrati family or something. Also, for anyone who doesn't like that element of the Kim, there is a website, Accumulation it's called, where you can actually experiment with dialogue options. If it stresses you out, like it does with me, honestly, that you might fuck up and have to restart, I'd highly recommend just using the Accumulation whenever you're going through your Kim conversations. It's also a great way to explore the endings you didn't get. Very great tool, I highly recommend it. Okay, this has been going on for way longer than I thought, so when I said that I was going to try and hit 25 an episode, fuck that. I've already been recording for over an hour. I don't think it's going to be over an hour in the video because I've had to take breaks to like drink water and stuff, but I'm just going to try and hit a specific time break point. I take back the bullshit I said earlier. We're gonna jump around to ones that I think are more interesting. So, with that said, next up, my hot take, Natah is the worst main story quest. It brings so much important information and delivers it awfully. The whole quest is about the return of the Sentients, yet you don't even see them. And don't forget the infamous 10-minute survival, where the most important lore stuff happens, but the new player is probably busy doing the mission. I recently got my friend into Warframe and I had to explain the whole quest in detail because they didn't understand a thing. Okay, I do want to say, I agree that Natah kinda sucks. From a gameplay perspective especially, it's not very good. The reveal of, like, the Lotus's true nature and the part where Teshin takes over and all that stuff, I like that, but from a gameplay perspective, it sucks. The worst main story quest? I don't agree with that for one reason. I don't even know if this is still relevant, because I don't know if it's still part of the main story because they keep changing stuff. Once Awake is the worst quest in the damn game, if you ask me. Once Awake is 3 missions. It is super boring, it makes no sense because you can already fight the Infested before that point in the game, and none of the gameplay in it is fun. I do not like Once Awake at all. I think it shows its age really bad. The Archwing also sucks, and I'm pretty sure that's still a mainline quest. So, honorable mention to that as well. But I agree, Natah, from a gameplay perspective, sucks ass. I have to give that to him, I'm not gonna lie. But in terms of the worst, I'd have to give that to Once Awake. That quest sucks ass. Okay, next up, give Equinox switch on dodge like Limbo's passive. I disagree with this because I think it would just rapidly become super annoying. Like, with Limbo, I think it makes sense to use his dodge in that way, to dip in and out of the rift. But for Equinox, I guess I should clarify why I think that for Limbo. Limbo, being in his rift, serves a defensive purpose, and dodging also serves a defensive purpose. So, dodging into the rift and, like, becoming invincible is like an extension of why you would dodge a lot of the time. But as Equinox, if you were switching by dodging, you would have all of your abilities completely change. And if you think about the consequences of that, that's a lot of stuff happening every time you roll. And, I mean, rolling, you might roll to avoid an attack, You might roll for mobility reasons, to adjust your positioning, tons of reasons you might roll. For Limbo, if he rolls and he goes into the Rift, whatever, right? Not a huge deal. For Equinox, if she rolls and has her entire kit change on her, well now all of the stuff that she's doing is totally different. I know that some people want Equinox's distinct forms to be removed from an ability to open it up for something new. I empathize with that position, but I think that if they were going to go that route, the best approach would be tap-hold functionality. Something like how Vauban's new mines work. Maybe you could have like day form as tap and night form as hold or something like that. Just if you wanted to have that kind of functionality, I think that the way to go would be tap-hold versus like a dodge switch. Okay, I'm getting kind of winded, but I want to talk about this one because I think it's probably one of the hottest takes I've ever seen. There are a lot of pieces to this, and I don't really want to talk about all of them because I think that the most interesting ones are at the end. So I'm going to skip points 1 and 2, or I'm going to gloss over them, rather, to focus on the third. So, point 1, RNG for Archimedeas and Circuit should only apply to Elite Archimedea and Steel Path Circuit. What I mean is, you should be able to take whatever frame and weapon you want for the normal modes. For Elite/Steel Path, that's where you have to choose from a random selection of frames/weapons. I think it's a great way to further distinguish how much more difficult those modes are. I'd also like if that was carried over to other game modes like Descendia, Sorties, Arbitrations, and Archon Hunts. I would also further increase the drop chance and drop amount of rewards for the harder variants of those missions. Okay, for this one, I have voiced my displeasure with the randomness of Archimedea and the like, and I do not agree with the stance of expanding it to other spots in the game. In my opinion, the difficulty being randomness just really sucks a lot of fun out of the game, because cross-item synergies and, like, putting a loadout together becomes so much less impactful, and also, sometimes I just want to play a certain Warframe, and it's not terrible that I can't play the same guy all the time, but to massively restrict my options in the majority of the game, I think would suck. Especially, this person mentioned sorties and arbitrations. Those aren't even endgame activities. I mean, arbitrations you can argue, I guess. But sorties? That's the thing you get after the War Within, I believe. Like, they're a fairly early thing. So, at that point, like, new players wouldn't have most of what's in there, I don't think. Second point, Elite/SP across all game modes should be restricted to MR 15+. MR requirements for that I don't think is a terrible idea, but 15 is really steep. I'm guessing this is probably to, like, prevent matchmaking problems. Some people just join to get carried, but I also feel like it's kind of arbitrary to tie that kind of thing to mastery rank. It's already tied to, for specifically Elite, right? Elite Archimedea. First you have to get to rank 5 in the Syndicate, and then you have to complete an Archimedea with, I think, almost every modifier or every modifier to unlock Elite. So there's already kind of a filtration system there. Okay, for the one that I really want to talk about, that's point 3 in 3-1. Bring back daily death revive caps, specifically for Steel Path missions. I think it's fine if a frame runs out of revives for the day, and the frame can still be used in normal missions. But if you hit that daily cap, which should increase with mastery rank, you can't use that frame in Elite or Steel Path missions for the rest of the day, or 24 hours from that point, but that might be going too far. 3-1. If you don't have any more revives with a frame, that shouldn't remove it from the RNG pool of Archimedea, and it should just not allow you to select that frame. Another option to this would be, you're allowed to bring a frame that has no more revives, but if you go down and die, you automatically fail the mission, losing all rewards in progress. Reading this blew my mind because I never thought I would ever hear someone ask for this mechanic to come back, and I genuinely just have to ask, why? I don't understand the game design intention of this, because dying and just being dead and losing all your progress is frustrating, and the fact that this is, like, the suggestion here is to bring it into all Steel Path missions, that if I die because I get jumped by violence and, you know, he dispels my abilities and so I can't fight back, and that means that now I run the risk of not being able to do any other difficult content for a day? Like, what's the point of locking me out of that stuff for an entire day? Especially with the extension that, like, oh, if you have no more revives with a frame, they should be removed, or they should not be removed from the RNG pools of places like Archimedea. That would make them undoable. If I die too many times, then I couldn't finish them anymore, because all of my frames could potentially be RNG restricted. They also mention that, like, if you have no more revives, if you go down and die, then you fail the mission. That's already how it works in solo play, and you can lose all rewards if you die 3 times in Archimedea through a mechanic called Mortis Strike. If you die 3 times, I think you might have to be dead for a certain amount of time, but I believe it's if you go down 3 times, totally die 3 times, you cannot earn more rewards. Like, there are already systems in place to punish you for losing. You lose all of your rewards if you die too many times in a mission, right? I don't understand the goal from a game design perspective of making this more punishing and making your failures in one mission carry over to the next mission. I feel like missions generally should be like a stateless thing, right? Like when you play a mission, it is not contingent on your progress in other missions aside from Archimedea. And even then, that's only like kind of tacitly related. You're not like sharing revives across the whole run, right? I don't know. I thought this take was fucking nuts. Maybe I'm the weird one for this, but I do not understand the game design incentive of either A, massively increasing the randomness into other parts of the game, which I have a whole video about my issues with that as an approach to difficulty, but B, daily revives again and being locked out of hard content on a frame if you die too much. I don't agree with that at all. That is wild. Okay, I am skipping a few because I want to just kind of get to the juiciest ones here. So for anyone who left a hot take I didn't read, I'm sorry, but we've only got a couple more left. So next up, one of my hot takes, alerts were better than Nightwave. I played for 1 year before alerts were removed and were replaced by Nightwave. They made the game feel alive, with priority missions that I could accept, like the mercenary ninja taking on commissions that they were supposed to be. They also served as a focal point for random people to find fast public groups. If they brought alerts back, I'd make some QOL changes to make them more compatible with work and school and generally life schedules that prevent people from playing every minute of every day. They were still better than Nightwave while I was working 2 jobs. Okay, the rest of this I don't think is really relevant. It kind of expands on the concept, but I'm going to show it on screen so that I'm not taking this person out of context or leaving part of their argument out. Now, could alerts be reworked into like a contract system or something? Yeah, totally, but when rewards were exclusive to alerts, there was the problem of missing shit all the time, like Nightane especially. But also, dude, when I was a kid, I remember my phone, I had alert notifications on the Warframe mobile app for Vauban parts, because I could not get him. He always happened to show up while I was at school, and one night, it was like 4 in the morning on a school night, and my phone woke me up because there was a Vauban alert, and I got the fuck up, and I did the fucking alert, because I wanted him, and I couldn't get him. I had been trying for like over a week at that point, and that one last part just never was in rotation when I needed it to be. So, here's my question then, for this person, I guess. Alerts, fundamentally, were a very random thing, and if you were going to make some QOL changes to make them more compatible with life schedules, how would you do that without violating what made alerts distinct? Would it be more like event alerts, where the alerts would have some valuable thing that you could get, but like the value was consistent, it was just that the mission type rotated out? Would it be like alerts were contracts that lasted for a limited amount of time? You know, how would that work? Because like my thought process is, if we wanted to have alerts, I think it could be cool to have like a contract system. So the contracts are limited time, like maybe a couple days, but you have that whole span of time to do those priority missions to get their reward. I feel like I could see that working better. Like I said, it's like almost like a bounty board type of thing where you could take a contract mission. But I feel like I wish that they would have elaborated more on the QOL thing, because I feel like that's just kind of totally glossed over in terms of, okay, so you're going to make some QOL changes to make them more compatible with life schedules, but how are you going to do that exactly? Because if you're going to make alerts more consistent or less random, then it kind of changes what seems like part of why you liked them in the first place. So, I don't know. I think that like more elaboration on that specific point would have been helpful, because I feel like I'm left a little confused as to how exactly they would go about overhauling the system to make it not cancer, because previously it was rough. If you had bad luck or were busy, getting what you wanted in a timely manner was pretty rough. And then just kind of with the Nightwave thing in general, Nightwave does feel like weekly chores. I do agree with that. I like how it mixes up the gameplay with the variety of challenges you have, but it is like a weekly chore system. And that kind of sucks. Like, after I complete my weekly track, I don't even bother with it anymore, and I always look forward to the end of the track so I don't have to deal with it. That's kind of like a wider problem with Nightwave, and that could be its own topic, I think. But to sort of summarize my thoughts, I could see us reworking the alert system into something that's friendlier. I just wish that there was a better explanation of how this person wanted to approach that. And I also just want to say, alerts being better than Nightwave in their old form, I totally disagree with. I think I should probably like focus it on like that point specifically, the randomness in getting stuff you wanted, Nightane being a massive pain to farm, all of that stuff, I disagree. Like, Nightwave has its problems, but I do think that the consistency it provides is an improvement to the total chaos that was the alert system. So for that fundamental point, I'm just going to have to disagree. I think Nightwave has its problems, I think that the weekly chore element of it sucks, but I think it was better than my middle schooler, self waking up at 4 a.m. on a school night to get the Vauban piece I've been farming for, or trying to get rather, for like a week. Okay, next up, my hot take, Steel Path simply isn't fun. Like, it can be challenging at times, which can be enjoyable, but because it limits your build flexibility so much to deal with the stronger enemies, it feels like there's way less room to experiment when the game's biggest selling point is build variety. Unless I'm testing out a high-end build, I've never found myself actually wanting to play Steel Path, and usually only do it if I need to for one reason or another. This is interesting to me because I feel like it's a narrow mindset, if that makes sense. Steel Path, in my opinion, is really easy at this point in the game's life, and it doesn't limit build variety in my view at all, because like, the normal path is such a joke that anything can work there, and at that point I find it boring, because you can just blow through every enemy. Like I talked about earlier, the game doesn't push back at all in that circumstance, right? There is no pushback. The Steel Path offers resistance. There is something to sink your teeth into when it comes to the combat. It demands some level of knowledge and prowess to actually compete. But especially after Jade Shadows with the nerfs to armor, you can make so much work in this environment that I would not argue that it hurts build flexibility at all, personally. In fact, I would say that it makes it more interesting because there is that resistance. Like, there's build flexibility on the normal path in comparison by virtue of the fact that anything can work because everything is so much easier. On the Steel Path, the build variety I think is more interesting because you can't just slap on whatever. There's like more intentionality is required, if that makes sense. You really have to think about what you're doing a lot more. Not to some crazy extent, Steel Path is fairly easy in my opinion, once you know what you're doing, but I don't think it limits build variety. So I think that this person, I'm making an assumption here, I'm going to acknowledge that, but I wonder if it's like maybe they lack gear, maxed out mods, or there's some kind of friction there, because there is a point in the game where Steel Path sucks to play, and that's right after you unlock it. When you're still leveling up all your primed mods, your galvanized mods, leveling all of your arcanes, at that point it is hard, and it does feel like it's limiting your build variety, because you really do have to focus on the best possible stuff to succeed. And if this person is in that limbo in the game, I get where this take is coming from. It is a frustrating place to be, but once you overcome that hump, once you get through the suck of initial Steel Path and working your way through it for the first time, I think it becomes a more fun playground to experiment because there is that pushback from the enemies that makes it more entertaining. Okay, this is our final hot take of the video, and I'm only including it because I thought it was really fucking funny. Hot take, Olive Garden soups are all better than any of the entrees listed and served on their menu. What's funny about this is that I don't think in the video I ever actually specified you had to leave a Warframe hot take, unlike I did in the original post, so this guy's not really breaking any rules by asking this. Okay, so here is how I'm gonna close this video. I am going to give you all a story from my life that actually does relate to this, I swear. So, when Nitro and I... Okay, context for people who don't watch my streams. Nitro is my boyfriend. And when Nitro and I first started dating, we lived long distance. I live in Texas now, but originally I lived in Iowa, so I lived, 14 hours away from him. I guess 16 hours away from him or so. So we did a lot of stuff, we would play a lot of games together and whatnot to spend time with each other. And there is a social game called Tower Unite. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Tower, but we'd play it quite a bit just, to hang out with our friends and whatnot. And in Tower Unite there is a casino, and that casino has horse betting, and all of the horses have totally ridiculous names. And so when we were playing, Nitro was horse betting and I couldn't find him for like 5 or 6 minutes, and he just didn't tell me where he was, and I finally stumble across him at the casino and ask him what he's doing. And the horse betting is done on tablets. So he replies to me, "These touchscreen Olive Garden menus are really weird." And I go, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've been waiting for my breadsticks for like the last 30 minutes. And I, just to carry on with the bit, I'm like, Nitro, breadsticks is the name of a horse. How much money have you put down on this? And he's like, I didn't expect the breadsticks to cost $5,000. And so it became this recurring joke about Nitro struggling with the Olive Garden touchscreen menu, resulting in him losing a bunch of money on horse betting. So, shit, it was like a year and a half after we started dating when I finally had the money to fly down here and visit him. The first place we went on a date was to Olive Garden as an homage to that joke, and we still go sometimes, specifically because of that incident and because it was, you know, like a fun moment in our relationship. So I'm sorry for anyone who's homophobic. I feel some people like dry heaving into like airplane bags right now. You know, I'm sorry. I won't go into any intimate details, okay? I promise. This is just, I'm just talking about things, okay? Pretend Nitro's a girl. If it helps, pretend I said girlfriend. The story doesn't functionally change, okay? So yeah, all of this to say, as for this hot take, their soup is really good. I do like Olive Garden soup, but I think I prefer their entrees overall. But the real sleeper hit, okay, is the breadsticks. The breadsticks are really why you go to Olive Garden. Nitro has a conspiracy theory that the sauce they serve with them is different from the sauce on their pasta. He's been told by multiple waiters that's not true and he doesn't believe them. I think it's like the funniest low-stakes conspiracy I've ever seen somebody believe in, is that they're giving you a different Alfredo sauce with your breadsticks. I'm sorry, this shit's cracking me up, it's so funny. So, I don't know, the soup is really good. They don't give you that much, though, so that kinda sucks. But I do like it. I don't know if I'd say more than the entrees. Okay, that's gonna do it for this video. My throat is starting to struggle from all the talking I've been doing, so I'm really sorry to everyone who I had to skip for this. Like I said, I picked out 25 comments, and my goal was to get through all of them regardless of time, but I'm getting pretty winded from all of the talking I've been doing, so I think I need to take a step back, right? Sort of regroup. Maybe I'll mix some of the takes into the next episode. I also want to say, if you're going to leave a take, remember, please reply to the pinned comment below with it, just to make this easier for myself. Finding these takes was a huge pain in the ass. Beyond that, thank you for watching if you made it to the end of this. Like I said earlier, let me know in the comments if you want to see this as like a more regular thing. I've thought about maybe making this like a weekend show. These don't take a ton of time to make. I can make them in like a day, so it doesn't really eat into the work time for my other projects. I've been hard at work on a video about the Murmur that's going to be like an hour long, and I'm trying to be very ambitious with the way it's made, so my hope is that these can be like sort of... It's almost like the... Oh god, should I even say his name? It's like the pyrocynical logic. I swear I'm not into the same things as Pyro. I'm bringing him up for a very specific reason. He has long used the argument that his slop content funds his high-effort content. Maybe we're shifting in that direction. Maybe. I don't think that the shit I post is as slop as pyrocynical with this stuff, right? But that's kind of like my mentality. It's like, this stuff is fairly easy. I want to make more ambitious, longer, interesting projects. So let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing this as like a weekly show, or if maybe that would be too frequent, right? Let me know your thoughts. Beyond that, I don't know, like, subscribe, make sure to floss, that's probably important. And thank you to my members. I've probably had their names on screen for a little bit now. These people really do help me a lot with YouTube being my full-time job in terms of funding the content. They also probably saw this video early, so if you want to see this type of dog shit, you know, a day early for some reason, I guess you can join for that. But yeah, thank you to my members, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all next time with hopefully even hotter takes. The goal is by the time we reach double digits, I will open my images folder of takes and it will just singe me alive. You will hear me get, like, blown away by the solar wind. Like, that's the objective. So keep sending me your hottest takes. We'll keep talking about them. My goal is not to be rude with this. I want to earnestly engage with these things. So let me know what you think and I'll do my best to get to it. Alright, see ya.